Hi, and welcome to the ninth and final installment of Messy-nism, the Jewish view of Moshiach. Just as a warning, this episode can contain some controversial material. Listener discretion is advised. This week we cover Zionism and the Messianic vision of Rav Kook, as well as the Lubavitcher Rebbi and the revival of the fervor for bringing Moshiach at the end of the 20th century. We take a look at some Messianic claimants already in the 21st century, including the Yanuka, and conclude with an attempt at understanding the value and need for Mashiach and Yiddishkeit overall. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so just to give us a really broad strokes recap of everything we've done. We started with Rambam and the Gaonim, and the Rambam's approach to Mashiach was very rationalist, very pragmatic, welcome. And the Gaonim's approach was more miraculous. The psukim mean what they say they mean, versus reading them symbolically. We then went through and saw the psukim in Tanakh, which didn't focus as much on a Mashiach per se, as they did on the Messianic age and the things that were going to happen to the world, be they positive or sometimes, like we saw from Amos, that before Mashiach arrives, there's going to be some trials and tribulations. It wasn't until way after the close of Tanakh and the Gemara, especially in the Bavli, that we started to see a focus on a person, right? A personification of Mashiach. The person is not just one component of the Messianic age. He is the person who will usher in the Messianic age. He's not sort of a component. He is what is propelling history forward, and the focus on that individual particularly. Then we saw the historical impact after the times of the Gemara, certainly from the times of Christianity, really, and on, how there was in the Jewish psyche a need after every sort of traumatic event. It precipitated another claimant for Mashiach, which unfortunately led to failed claims, and then the response to those failed claims over time. And then we saw a separate strain that was really more recent, that had to do with a focus on mysticism, and specifically in the case of Shabtai Tzvi, the use of mysticism to promote a radically different type of messianic claim. This isn't a charismatic leader who says, "Follow me, let's go conquer the world." This is someone who creates a whole system of belief based on mysticism that says, "I'm the Mashiach, not because I've fulfilled anything that was indicated in the Rambam or even in the Psukim, but I can contort all of those things from Chazal and from the Psukim through mysticism. I can make them mean whatever I want them to mean, because we're in a Messianic age where all of the rules kind of go out the window, and I can use these mystical concepts to sort of support that approach." Oh, wonderful. Happy to have you. Then after the failure and the debacle really of Shabtai Tzvi, we saw the sequel with Jacob Frank and the Frankists, who really took that even to a more incredible extreme. And then the heresy hunters, Rav Moshe Chagiz and Rav Yaakov Emden, who tried to root out any closeted Sabbatian influence and rabbinic authorities, which in the end
may or may not
right, which in the end really backfired on them, and rather than having the people who were the target of the accusations be the ones run out of town, the heresy hunters themselves were run out of town. And the reason for that was, again, from the psychological perspective, people were done. People had enough of the whole concept of Shabtai Tzvi and Sabbatianism. They preferred the approach of the Rishon LeZion, and what was preferred by many communities was, look, it's don't ask, don't tell. I don't want to know. Just everyone come back to shul and be a good, normal Jew, and we don't want to hear any more about it. So when you have people screaming from the rafters, that one's a Sabbatean, that one's a Sabbatean, people they're exhausted from it, and they just want to go back to normal life. So hopefully where we're at today is really the last gasps of these types of claimants. And we'll talk maybe about Messianism in the 21st century. So,
and again, though, you're only really referring to the Eastern Europe and the Ottoman Empire.
Yes. Okay, so where do we go from there? So one of the things I think we mentioned in passing, but it is worth pausing on, is a recoiling, a pulling back from Kabbalah. So there are certainly exceptions like the Vilna Gaon and his main students. There is an approach in the Hasidic world of kind of toning down or making more palatable for the masses these Kabbalistic ideas. But by and large, there is a sense that Kabbalah is what got us into this mess, right? The Sabbatians, the Frankists, even people like Rav Yonatan Eibeshitz and Ramchal who were steeped in mysticism. There was danger there, and so that led to things like don't study Kabbalah until you're 40 years old, or other concerns or warning signs that people saw in the use of mysticism. So the Vilna Gaon famously put the Hasidim in cherem, partly because he felt that they were embracing these ideas that really trace themselves back to Shabtai Tzvi. The other thing that we saw way back when we were talking about Bar Kokhba was that after you have a failed Messiah that reaches, a significant height, you have a pulling back from just Messianism in general. So unlike where we saw historically every 50 or 100 years you have another claimant from let's say the 400s or 500s all the way through the 1600s, after Shabtai Tzvi and Jacob Frank, you kind of have an amnesty for about 200 years before you have anybody else who starts talking about Mashiach in any meaningful way. The Hasidim talk about Mashiach as a concept, but claimants, people who get up and say, I'm the guy, or someone else claiming on their behalf, you have these like murmurs and rumors, especially in the Hasidic world, of Rabbi Nachman or Rav Arlen of Karlin. They were talking about he died young and he was killed by the Cossacks, and if you make a gematria of Cossack, you can get Armulus. But these are all like they're small localized things. They never become a movement. And I think part of the reason they don't become a movement is because people are on guard. People have had enough, of the aftermath of Shabtai Tzvi that they're not ready for a true Messianic claimant. The extent, just to give you the sort of the radical left-leaning extent of this, is the Pittsburgh Platform of 1885, which makes the following declaration.
You'd know about that, wouldn't you?
I'm just going to read to you the part about Mashiach. So they state as follows: we recognize in the modern era of universal culture of heart and intellect the approaching of the realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of the kingdom of truth, justice, and peace among all men. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. So that is...
Who put that out?
That's the Reform platform. That's like Reform Judaism's approach to Mashiach is, yes, it would be nice if everybody got together in Kumbaya, but let's leave religion out of it. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
but that was their platform in the 1880s. It has evolved and continues to evolve.
Yes, I'm sure, but I'm using that sort of to illustrate how far you can pull away from the concept of Mashiach in the 19th in the 19th and 20th centuries. Okay, so that takes us up to.
But they were fighting a different. That comment is fighting a different battle. That has nothing to do with Moshiach per se. The battle that they're fighting is a Reformation battle that they have to be one of American society in this situation.
Pretty good.
For sure. Is it good?
Yeah, the salsa's pretty good.
That's awesome. I'm happy.
It's a comment, same as the German community.
Right. We're
German.
American first and Jewish
Correct.
second.
It isn't a comment on Moshiach. It's a comment of.
It sees Moshiach as one more thing that.
As a threat.
Yes, as a threat.
It sees Moshiach as a threat to their.
Right.
Correct.
Because if your hope is to eventually go to Palestine, and then you're a fifth column, right? Then you don't have the native country's interest at heart. You have.
But they weren't again. They were in the 1880s. What they were speaking to more along the lines of was the becoming American, and just the American per se. It wasn't a comment on per se on Mashiach.
Fair.
It was more of a comment on religion per se as where they saw themselves.
That's fair. Okay, so that takes us to the beginning of the 20th century, and for the first time.
And also, you could also say, you say that Mashiach is pushed off. If you want to go scholarly, you can say it wasn't pushed. The concept wasn't pushed off. The concept was pushed to a different form.
What form would that be?
We're taught with this.
No. Okay. For discussion afterwards. So the turn of the 20th century sees the advent of Zionism, and Zionism is in itself at the time wholly secular. You don't get the religious component of Zionism until the beginning of the 1900s with Rav Yaakov Reines.
It starts religious and then switches anti-religious.
Okay. By the early 1900s, we're talking about. So the second wave of Aliyah is and the building of Eretz Yisrael at the time is secular.
Yes.
Into that fray, you get Rav Kook, and Rav Kook is an amazing personality who, using mystical concepts, is able to sort of psychoanalyze the actions of the secular Zionists and portray it through a Messianic lens. Now, that sounds very vague. Let me try to make it a little bit more concrete. What Rav Kook says, and a lot of this I'm taking from a wonderful lecture by Dr. Micha Goodman that I highly recommend, and I will share the link for it. But what Rav Kook essentially says in his writing explicitly is that these atheists, these secular Zionists, they might say that they have no interest in religion and that they're building up Eretz Yisrael purely for their own secular reasons, but in reality, the root of their soul, don't look at what they say, look at what they do. What they're doing is God's work. And what they're essentially doing is the work that's necessary to usher in the Messianic age. And Rav Kook uses the term Orod HaMashiach very frequently. My teacher, Rav Naor, traces that back possibly to Breslov and this book called Megillat Starim, which has been hidden by the Breslov community for several hundred years and was recently unearthed by Professor Mark. And it's worth that, there's a whole separate conversation. But what Rav Kook essentially does is sort of applies kind of a Freudian reading to their actions and says, you might protest that you're vegetarian, but what your actions show you are eating hamburgers and cooking out on the grill. So as much as you might claim to be wholly secular, the actions that you're involved in are completely religious, and not just religious. They're the advent of the Messianic age. Yes.
Yeah. No,
you're in agreement.
I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Because,
so
yeah.
I'm gonna Anything you want to add?
I'm just saying, you see this all the time. People pay lip service to a concept, and really their heart is clearly somewhere else.
Right.
Oh, I'm totally into diet and exercise. Meanwhile, the guy is stuffing his face and weighs 500 pounds and has never seen the inside of a gym. And
right,
like,
but he's got the T-shirt that says,
right.
you know, carbs are evil.
Right, exactly. You
Right.
know, and there are people, you know, the opposite who say, oh, you know, the crotchety, you know, I hate people with the hidden heart of gold who like spend, you know, like there was a Simpsons like where Mo Sizlak is like, you know, he's outwardly, you know, like a very cantankerous, like not happy guy, and then like the closing credits, like he steals this fan that would belong to like the Duff mascot.
Okay.
And then in the closing credits, you see him using the fan to like save people's lives and pour humanitarian relief on people, and like you know, like all sorts of stuff. Like secretly, like that's who you are.
Right, secretly
you know?
an awesome person. So the problem was that at the time, as beautiful as this philosophy might be, nobody was buying it. The secular Israelis who are doing the work are outraged and saying, "Who are you to tell us that you know better than us what our actual intent is?" Right? We are you know, disavowing all religion, and you're coming and saying, "Well, you might be disavowing it, but you're actually you know, even more religious than the religious," is Rav Kook's phraseology, and we'll see that inside. And the Haredi community is like, why are you trying to put a kosher stamp on these heretics, right? So Rav Kook in his day was not really championed.
Even now, he's still pretty controversial.
Well, yes, he's definitely still controversial. I think what happened over time was that the religious Zionism was sort of the fringe of Zionism. And that was the Rhinist approach was essentially parallel paths. That, look, Zionism is a benefit to Jews, and religious Jews also want to benefit Jews. So religious Jews can be Zionists because it's not about Judaism, it's about Jews. So we're all in this for improving the lives of Jews. So we can, after 67 and 73, the Zionist camp really embraced religious Zionism, and religious Zionism embraced Rav Kook. So Rav Kook went from the fringe of religious Zionism, which was the fringe of Zionism, to the heart of the whole enterprise, because after 67 especially, people saw open miracles, right? And people were like, wow, this is really Yemot HaMashiach. And who's there with, like, the philosophy to support everything that, Rav Kook has been talking about this for, you know, 100 years.
Right.
Okay, so I'll read you just a couple lines from one of Rav Kook's essays. This is a translation by my teacher, Rabbi Naor. This book is called The Souls of the World of Chaos. So this is an essay by Rav Kook where he talks about two types of people: those who have a soul from the world of Olamot de Tohu. There are two worlds in Kabbalistic thought: Olamot de Tohu, worlds of chaos, and Olamot de Tikkun, worlds of repair. And essentially, what Rav Kook is doing is talking, at least from a sociological perspective, the souls of the world of Tikkun are the standard religious Jew. The Jew who, 9 to 5, he goes to shul 3 times a day and he keeps kosher and Shabbos, right? And then you have the souls of the world of chaos. Those are the irreligious Zionists who are building up the country. And he says a remarkable thing. Souls of chaos, neshamot tohu, are higher than the souls of establishment, neshamot tikkun. They are very great. They seek much of existence, that which their vessels, their kelim, cannot support. They seek a very great light. They cannot tolerate whatever is finite, defined, and esteemable. They descended from their elevation from the beginning of the birthing of existence. They rose up as a flame and were extinguished. Their infinite longing will not end. They are garbed in various vessels. They aspire way beyond the measure. They aspire and fall. They see that they are imprisoned in laws, in circumscribed conditions that do not allow them to expand beyond limit to unstoppable heights, and they fall into depression, into resignation, into anger, and from rage into wickedness, malice, lowliness, ugliness, abomination, destruction, and all manner of evil. Their agitation will not be quieted. And he goes on to talk about these souls and how essentially they are of such great heights. They're even greater than the regular standard Jew, and that's why they rebel against the constrictures of religion, because of the greatness of their souls. Now, if that reminds you, well, let me ask, does that remind you of anybody? No? Any takers?
Kain.
Not Kain. So, someone we've covered very recently in this series.
Mary Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene, interesting.
Are you
So-
trying to say Shabtai Tzvi?
I'm trying to say Nathan of Gaza, which is just as good as saying Shabtai Tzvi.
I don't like it.
I don't like it either, but I'm not alone.
Not liking it?
No, I'm not alone in seeing that connection. But I'll first start with the defense against this kind of line of thinking. So Rav Kook in his letters does mention Shabtai Tzvi and Nathan of Gaza very explicitly to disavow their entire approach, to talk about how it is antithetical to Judaism and wrong and evil. That said, there are still some of these ideas that bear, I guess, investigating. Rabbi Nor is very explicit in post-Sabbatian Sabbatianism, where he has a chapter on Rav Kook and Shabtai Tzvi, and he, on page 111, is very definite. Rabbi Kook is definitely no Sabbatian. I don't think it gets any more explicit than that. But in a footnote, of which Rabbi Nor is famous, he points you to
Does he use the word antinomian?
Yeah, like basically on every page. He directs you to Yehuda Liebes and Tamar Ross. So Yehuda Liebes is the we'll call it a second generation scholar. He's a student of Gershom Sholem, and Tamar Ross is an interesting personality. We'll call her a mainstream Orthodox feminist, among other things. But both are very well-read, scholarly individuals who find parallels between Rav Kook's characterization of Neshamot Tohu, which is what we just read, souls of chaos, and Nathan of Gaza's novel theory of Or She'ein Bo Machshava. Now, again, Rabbi Noor defends Rav Kook and says in the footnote, as it is highly unlikely Rav Kook had any direct access to Nathan's as yet unpublished work, Sefer HaBriah, one may safely assume the similarity is coincidental, unless one figures, as do some, that the founding fathers of Zionism displayed certain Sabbatian features, and Rav Kook's psychoanalysis of those souls perforce latches onto the Sabbatian Weltanschauung, which is German for worldview. Okay. Where do I want to go with all this? Rav Kook was a mystic, and part of the mystical approach in general to failed messiahs, especially the more successful failed messiahs, was not these people are evil and wrong and we should have nothing to do with them, but rather there was something in what they did that was a spark of holiness, and we have to find a way to either incorporate that, redeem that, or understand it in some way and take some positivity out of it. He goes so far, and many Kabbalists do this, to talk about redeeming the soul of Jesus. Because, again, you have a failed Messianic claimant who accomplished, in terms of the world's acceptance of their ideas, accomplished something. There was something there. Something happened. Whether or not it's within mainstream Judaism to the mystic is almost irrelevant. It's more relevant to say God would not have created such an outcome were it not that there was some spark of holiness there that had some vitality and needs the mystical repair to be affected.
Well, we had the Rambam's statement, right, a couple of weeks back that, those two folks were there to prepare the whole world for Moshiach.
Correct. It's the same idea, just in a more mystical garb. But
yeah, it's sort of lurching the entire human race forward one notch.
Correct. I love how you describe that. This book, Souls of the World of Chaos, came out recently, and there was a talk by Rabbi Naor, Shmuel Braun, and Rabbi Mark Gottlieb. And the question of Rav Kook's ideas overlapping with Nathan of Gaza came up in the talk. There's a video, which, again, I will send you a link to. And Rabbi Naor, again, defends Rav Kook. And the questioner says something to the effect of, these sound like Sabbatian or ideas from Nathan of Gaza. And Rabbi Mark Gottlieb defends the idea that Rav Kook expressed by saying, well, you have this concept of the Makom Shabale Tshuva Omdim Ein Tzadikim Gemurim Yecholim Lamod, which, as we know from our classes, was exactly what the Sabbateans hung their hat on. So no one touched that. I'm sure Rabbi Naor knew where that was headed and didn't want to comment on it. But to me, it was almost comical that the defense was essentially more of the Sabbatean thought, unbeknownst to the person who was uttering it. The other thing that Rav Kook does is gives this amazing, I'm not going to read inside actually, just for sake of time. Rav Kook is asked to give a eulogy for Theodor Herzl, Binyamin Zev, Dr. Binyamin Zev Herzl, who was by no means a religious Jew, and the halacha seems pretty clear that you're not supposed to eulogize such a person. Machal Shabbos b'far Hesia, those kinds of things. So Rav Kook was put in a very awkward position of having to do an eulogy, where he never directly referred to Herzl, but the actual eulogy, he essentially describes Herzl as having either had the possibility of or having been Moshiach ben Yosef. Because if you look again at the actions and not at the results of the work that the person put in, you want to talk about kibbutz galios and doing things like you said to push the Jewish world towards a Messianic age. Herzl ranks right up there, right? The result of what was done is the founding of the state of Israel, and we are all so much the better for those efforts, whether or not they were done with the intention, right, with the intention of that or whatever. From Rav Kook's perspective, it's irrelevant. Here you have a person who, again, from that Kabbalist perspective, would have, could have, should have been, or maybe was Mashiach ben Yosef, just based on the fact that they brought the Messianic age closer than it had ever been before. Now, all of this
is very hard to understand.
All of this raises the ire of the Hasidic community, the Haredi community, especially the Mun Kacharav, Rav Elazar Shapira, and in his footsteps came Rav Yolish Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rav. Okay, so the Satmar Rav, before I guess we get to the Satmar Rav, I'll mention one comment on the Messianic age from the Rav, from Rav Yasher Ber Soloveitchik. So in his work Kol Dodi Dofek, he talks about, and we learned Shir Shirim together. So he talks about the beloved that comes knocking at the door 3 times. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu came knocking on the door of his beloved Klal Yisrael, and the most recent of those knockings is the establishment of the state of Eretz Yisrael. And the Rav basically says, how sad it is, how dare we not respond to it? If you can clearly see the hand of God in history, where the Jewish people are zocha to return to Eretz Yisrael for the first time in 2,000 years, it requires a response. It requires people to see this as the positive, amazing outreach that God is doing, requires us to acknowledge it and to respond to it. To me, it's ironic that Rav Yoel Teitelbaum's work, Vayol Moshe, is based on Shir HaShirim as well. So there's a Gemara in Ksuvis that says it's darshaning a pasuk from Shir HaShirim. The pasuk says, "Ishpiyasei eschem benos Yerushalayim." God says, "I make you swear," or the beloved in the story, who we're going to assume is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who says to the Jewish people, "I will make you swear benos Yerushalayim that there are these 3 times that God adjures the Jewish people to swear. One of the oaths that they are forced to swear is that they will not be yala b'choma. They won't forcibly enter back into Eretz Yisrael. That instead they'll be taken through miraculous means." But the Zionists did the exact opposite. They put their effort directly into building Eretz Yisrael.
And they fought a war.
They fought, right. They said they sort of turned the whole idea of Gullus on its head. The way that the Haredim look at Gullus is because of your sins you're in Gullus and you're waiting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take you out of Gullus. The Zionists said your sin is that you're not taking yourself out of Gullus. Take yourself out of Gullus, and right. We'll worry about HaKadosh Baruch Hu after that. And so Rav Yoel Teitelbaum pens this, his magnum opus, sort of the party line is that this is an evil state. This is Maisa Satan, especially after the horrors that the Satmar went through in the Holocaust. He saw this as a continuation of Maisa Satan, that Satan is involved in the building of Eretz Yisrael because it's not a Jewish enterprise. You have enshrined in the Constitution laws protecting, things that are anathema to Torah. It's not done with Torah as the guide, and so that was his approach, not seeing this the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael in a messianic light, but rather seeing it almost as the opposite. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the 20th century and to the Lubavitch movement. There is a tremendous amount of information about Rav Menachem Mendel Schneerson and the Lubavitch movement of the end of the 20th century. I am wholly unqualified to speak to most of it. There are many more who know much more than I do about it, but I don't think we would be. I think I'd be doing a dereliction of my duty to not include at least the little bit that I understand. So that's all I can do. What I will tell you comes mostly from secondhand material like Elliot Wolfson's wonderful book, Open Secret, where he talks about the theology of the Lubavitch movement more so than the firsthand material of what was actually written directly by the Rebbe.
Does he sort of guesstimate how much of the current day Lubavitch movement are Mashiachist?
No, we're going to get to that in a minute. So the first thing that we have to do is credit the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe with bringing Messianic consciousness back to the Jewish people, especially into the Hasidic and Haredi world. It had been dormant for 200 years, and through sheer force of will and personality, he brought it back. It sounds like from his theology there may be some of his writings which we'll call antinomian. Wolfson calls it hypernomian. I don't think there's a need to invent a new term, but the bottom line is that Judaism is a religion of deed, not creed. From a purely halachic perspective, the Rebbe and the Lubavitch movement, to my knowledge, never veered in any way from halacha. He was a truly God-fearing, upstanding tzaddik and Talmud Chacham in everything that he did. The controversy was really around: is he quelling the idea of other people claiming him to be Mashiach on his behalf? Meaning, he never got up there and said, "I'm Mashiach, and here's what I want you to do about it." There were those that made the claim on his behalf. He didn't do an exceedingly strong job at putting those claims to rest. At a certain point, I think it was in 91, he essentially says that it's no longer up to me to bring Mashiach, now it's up to everybody individually. And he uses this phrase, I think it's, I have it over here. Yes. Every person has to do so via lights of tohu and vessels of tikkun. So that there's allusions there to the same idea that Rav Kook, who was really taking it from the Arizal and perhaps even from the Zohar, but it's the same basic idea. So again, to go back to Rambam, because there is safety in Rambam. From a Rambam perspective, did the Lubavitcher Rebbe do the things that are necessary to qualify him as Moshiach? I think we can categorically say no. He didn't build the Beis HaMikdash, he didn't bring the Jews back there, right? But did the Lubavitcher Rebbe do more in his generation than anybody else to move the Jewish world towards the Messianic age, to get people to care about Mashiach, to get people doing mitzvos in mass, all of those kinds? I think the answer to that is categorically yes. I don't think there is anybody in his time that would have been more qualified to be considered Mashiach, given all the work that he did, and the fact that the Jewish people still to this day benefit from it, I think speaks volumes to that. After he passes away, you get the same kind of breakdown that Leon Fessinger in his study When Prophecy Fails what you tend to expect from mass messianic movements, which is you get those people, the large majority, who abandon the belief that person was Mashiach, and then you get some hardcore believers who don't care whether or not the person died or the time passed. They are still, true believers, so to speak. The numbers I don't know. What you also get immediately thereafter are heresy hunters, and this time heresy defenders. Dr. David Berger is, I think, the most famous for trying to root out and expose Lubavitch leaders who still believed, even after he died, that the Rebbe could come back and still be Mashiach. We saw Dr. Berger only refers to the Gemara in Bava Basra. We saw the Gemara in Bava Basra and the Gemara in the Yerushalmi that talk about the possibility. And I would say it's, if not mainstream, it's certainly within the panoply of Judaism to say that there is a possibility for Mashiach to come back after he dies. But Rabbi Dr. Berger was more of a McCarthyist in trying to identify everybody and anybody who could possibly still believe in the Rebbe. It was the brother of Rav Yasher Ber Soloveitchik, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, who pens a very extensive defense of the Lubavitch movement against Dr. Berger's attacks. Okay, that takes us through the end of the 20th century. Just for the sake of completeness, I'll mention the approach of two philosophers, Hermann Cohen in the 19th century and Yeshayahu Leibowitz in the 20th century. Their view of Mashiach is, to me, just a great example of philosophers ruining a concept, but I'll read to you what Yeshayahu Leibowitz had to say. The Mashiach is essentially he who always will come. He is the eternal future. The Messiah who comes, the Messiah of the present, is invariably the false Messiah. Yeah. Okay, so to get us to the 21st century, I want to talk about two radically different individuals in the 21st century who are Messianic claimants. The first was a nice Jewish boy who grew up to be, we'll say, a radically polarizing figure, using his billionaire status to have incredible sway in a lot of areas of life. Who did you guess?
Who did you say?
A nice, I think, Romanian Jewish boy who is a billionaire today, 21st century, and polarized.
He's giving it to his son.
Who is it?
Soros.
George Soros, excellent. The LA Times quotes George Soros as follows. It seems that Soros believes he was anointed by God. I fancied myself as some kind of god, he wrote. If truth be known, I carried some rather potent messianic fantasies with me from childhood, which I felt I had to control, otherwise they might get me into trouble. When asked by Britain's independent newspaper to elaborate on that passage, Soros said, "It is sort of a disease when you consider yourself some kind of god, the creator of everything. But I feel comfortable about it now, since I began to live it out." That is George Soros. It just shows you that you can be wholly secular and still suffer from messianic fantasies and yeah. The other personality I'd like to mention is someone who they call the Yanuka. This is Rabbi Shlomo Yehuda Be'eri, who lives in Eretz Yisrael. I don't have too much.
What, honey?
Okay, so the Yanuka is a reference to a character in the Zohar. There is a young child, Yanuka, like a nursling.
Like a nursing
right.
child.
Who in the Zohar knows everything, knows Kol HaTorah Kula at the age of 3 or 5 or whatever, and there are drashas in the Zohar recorded from this child teaching Torah to adults. So this person, Rabbi Be'eri, from a young age, it seemed that he knew Kol HaTorah Kula. 14, 15 years old, he is giving shiurim to adults and very advanced people. It seems that he knows the revealed Torah, the mystical Torah, everything in between. He gives shiur to these throngs of people. Someone will ask him, he doesn't prepare a topic. Someone asks a question, and that is the shiur, and he just brings sources from all over Torah to answer whatever the question might be. He's also very into the arts, into like drawing, playing music, plays the piano. He's got chops. He is someone who hasn't made the claim, to my knowledge, directly that he is Moshiach, although others seem to have been making the claim on his behalf. Again, to make that claim, you have to be much more mystically inclined. From a Rambam perspective, I don't think anyone, maybe not with the exception of Herzl, but I don't think anybody since Bar Kokhba has done the things that are necessary to qualify as Mashiach in terms of trying to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, bringing the Jewish people back, fighting the wars of the Jewish people. So where does that leave us? So I'll end off with is one idea, which is that in spite of all the setbacks and the hardships that Messianism may have caused, it's also been the lifeblood of the Jewish people. It has been hope. In the ancient world, the Greeks and the Romans venerated the past. Judaism was the first religion to tell people, no, there's going to be a better time in the future. Forget about the ancient past. Look forward to something in the future. What does that tell us? We can look back at the history of Messianic claimants and say this has done nothing but bad stuff for the Jewish people. But what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I think, is telling us is that it's not enough for everyone to do their mitzvahs and have their olam haba, right? It's not enough for everybody to have their personal happy ending. It is necessary. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants is that we as a people actualize that, have Mashiach come, have a time. And so I think what that says is that it's more than just our hope for a happy ending. It's our belief that is God's hope. And I think that hope in and of itself is very powerful. I think it's worthwhile for everybody who hasn't read Asimov's Foundation to take a look at that and the Seldom Plan, which I think has some overlap with what we're discussing. And I'll conclude with a pasuk from Shir HaShirim, which is what the Rav was talking about. Kol dodi dofek, pischi liachusi rayosi yonasi tamasi. Okay. Yasher koach.
Wow, you made it all the way through to the end of this year. Thank you. These series are a passion of mine, and a lot of effort goes into them. I'd be grateful for your help in spreading the awareness to others. If you're interested in joining us live, getting the notes, or asking a question, please message me on Twitter at Isaacson, ISAACSON. Thanks.